Today, tributes are pouring in for one of the towering figures of the civil rights movement, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. The 84-year-old died this morning after a long illness, remembered for his transcendent rhetoric and gospel about seeking common ground. He first rose to prominence as a protege of Martin Luther King Jr., whose assassination he would also witness. Politics soon beckoned. He established the National Rainbow Coalition as a vehicle for a populist campaign, running for president twice, leading to one of his most famous speeches at the 1988 Democratic National Convention.
I was born in the slum, but the slum was not born in me. And it wasn't born in you, and you can make it. Wherever you are tonight, you can make it. Hold your head high. Stick your chest out. You can make it. It gets dark sometimes, but the morning comes. Don't you surrender. We must never surrender. America will get better and better. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
In a statement announcing his death, Jackson's family said, quote, his unwavering belief in justice, equality, and love uplifted millions, and we ask you to honor his memory by continuing the fight for the values he lived by. Aaron Haynes is editor-at-large at the 19th and MS Now political contributor. And also joining me is Eugene Daniels, MS Now senior Washington reporter and co-host of The Weekend. Eugene, Martin Luther King Jr.'s youngest child, Bernice King, posted a photo of her father and Jackson, writing, quote, both now ancestors. Jackson was there in Memphis when King was shot. How important was Jackson in carrying King's legacy forward?
Yeah, he was key, right? Jackson, after King dies, he is the person who is seen as, to some not the heir apparent, but ends up being the heir apparent to making sure that the Civil Rights Act continues to be passed, because it had to be updated. I think it was every 5 years. He is someone who also extended it, right? When he starts in the civil rights movement, he is younger than a lot of the leaders. They were young, but he was even younger. He was kind of an insurgent. He was, just like all of the young insurgents that work in politics and work in the social justice work. They pushed the elders to the left a little bit on a lot of the issues, and he continued to do that. He was also someone who took the civil rights movement and turned it into explicit politics, right? Being one of the first folks who were in the civil rights movement to actually run for office, definitely to run for president of the United States. And at the end of the day, the Democratic Party looks completely different if Jesse Jackson doesn't run. He creates this rainbow coalition, right, of people who are in the labor movement, people who are in, black people, white people, farmers, all of these folks kind of under the same umbrella, and showing the country that you can talk about, being a multiracial society and talk about kitchen table issues at the exact same time. And all of that came from his time with King.
Aaron, Jackson was only the second African-American to mount a nationwide campaign for president as a Democrat, and he managed to carve a grassroots path through the primaries that would be copied years later by other candidates and emulated. Can you talk to me about how he changed politics for the Democratic Party?
Yeah, listen, it's just like Eugene said, Reverend Jackson understood coalition building as a democratic project. So he connects civil rights directly to democratic participation, right? His presidential campaigns, while ultimately he does not succeed in becoming president, his work does expand political access for a great number of people. Before you had hope and change, right? In Barack Obama, you had, just as you saw in that speech, keep hope alive. And that was a message that resonated with a broad coalition of people. He understood, he knew that Black people, even as, he saw the need to increase their political power, he knew that Black people, Black Americans alone could not gain political power without that coalition that included all the folks that Eugene just named. So, I would really say that Reverend Jackson's political legacy is fundamentally about coalition building. You don't have what we now come to understand as intersectional politics without having that rainbow coalition. That is really the foundation for our understanding of the modern Democratic Party today.
Eugene, a close friend of Jackson's, the Reverend Al Sharpton, spoke this morning about Jackson's impact on American politics and the direct way that his 1988 campaign contributed to Barack Obama's election 20 years later. Take a listen.
Jesse Jackson helped change American politics. It was his historic run that was able to change proportional delegates in the convention. Had those rules not been changed, Barack Obama would not have been nominated some 20 years later, because Hillary Clinton won in all the major states, and she would have winner take all. The fact that he would get his proportion kept him in the running to where he was the nominee.
There's a famous photo of Jackson crying right there after Obama's election was announced. What else did Jackson do that set the stage for America's first black president?
You know, the Rev there is talking about the actual mechanics of this, and he knows this better than I, but it was not just the mechanics, it was also changing the imagination of the American people to help understand that a black person can be president of the United States, right? If you think about the black folks who had some kind of success running for president in this country, you have Shirley Chisholm, the first black person to actually do it. You have, and she hands off the baton to Jesse Jackson. He hands off the baton to Barack Obama. So not only is his legacy instrumental in helping to create the environment that leads to Barack Obama, is directly connected. If Jesse Jackson does not run for president, and do it the way that he did, show that you can actually win states, right? That is very important. Win actual delegates, then you don't end up with the country ready for Barack Obama. And one of the things that's so interesting is that when you look at the relationship between the two men, right, there were tense times, but at the end of the day, they both understood that one was the legacy of the other. And now, you have President Obama still continuing to, be in politics. That is all directly connected. I think something that's really interesting and unfortunate is that we often forget to give people their flowers while they're here. But the legacy of him is all the black people that ran for office and won or lost is the legacy of Jesse Jackson.
Including Cory Booker and Kamala Harris during the 2020 Democratic primary, which all three of us covered. And I remember even back then when the party was dealing with this racial reckoning around the protests around George Floyd's killing and really dealing with race in a way that the party hadn't before, that some were comparing that primary to the 1988 campaign, and there were often parallels drawn to Jesse Jackson and what he did. But we've come a far way from that now at this point. And as we confront the current political climate, Aaron, with the erasure of black history from museums and classrooms, how do you see Jesse Jackson's fight continuing on?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we absolutely are noting his contributions as a pillar of the civil rights movement, a key lieutenant of Martin Luther King Jr.'s, as we absolutely should. But his political legacy, talking about what the 84 and 88 campaigns meant, how he reshaped the Democratic Party and really American politics, is so important to note. I think also a key part of that is also the black women who were not simply part of that coalition, but they were foundational to it, right? I mean, Jackson's campaigns also recognized the leadership that black women were already exercising in their communities and elevated that leadership onto a national political stage. Eugene talked about giving people their flowers. At the 2024 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, you saw Jackson in one of his final public appearances on stage being honored by the party, finally, frankly, in a way that the party had not really acknowledged his contribution before. And so his campaigns expanded political access and visibility for black women. I think you're going to continue to see them carrying that legacy forward. What does it mean? The family is saying to carry his values forward. I think a lot of that could translate into whether and how we see, black voters showing up in the wake of his death as part of that ongoing legacy. Voter turnout, voter registration, that was so central to what he was all about. I covered him, for the better part of my career as an Associated Press reporter, and he was always on the front lines for civil rights and for voting rights and for making sure that such a diverse number of Americans had that seat at the table. And so I think that is part of what his legacy is going to be now.